discussions. So our agenda tonight is we'll talk about what Pax Silica is, look at one of the first places being tested out in the Philippines, look at the global supply chain, how it's affecting other countries, look at why we're having Pax Silica, and then talk about how it is we can fight back and shut down Pax Silica before moving into regional discussion groups to talk about how we'll be carrying out coordinated campaigns against Pax Silica. Big shout out to the watch party in Baltimore where they're building an effigy for Pisona on Monday. So thank you everyone, and a reminder, please keep introducing yourself and where you're coming from in the chat. If you're with a watch party, let us know how many are joining. And please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll be answering them at the end before we go into our group discussions. So thank you for everyone for joining, and I will pass it to Brandon Lee, who will introduce what Pax Silica is.
Thank you, Gordon. If we can put up the slides. So, what is Pax Silica? Put simply, this is a U.S. initiative to control the AI supply chain from mining to processing to assembly to data center, all under U.S. control and for the benefit of big tech billionaires. So Pax Silica is a U.S. initiative to control the global AI supply chain against China. Thank you for muting. Where did Pax Silica come from? China controls the processing of rare earth minerals and critical minerals necessary for the production of the chips that make up the data centers, powering AI. They also have a huge and growing research and development, and as the world's factory, a massive manufacturing base to produce cheaper tech. Since 2011, the US has ended its cooperation with China and pursued a pivot to Asia to regain and expand US economic, political, and military control of what they call the Indo-Pacific, where a third of the world's population lives. In December 2025, the State Department announced the formation of Pax Silica and has since recruited 25 countries as signatories, with Canada and Taiwan as observers. These countries make up traditional U.S. allies and puppets. Notably, Israel is a major partner in the initiative, given its tech sector, which has been deeply involved in the genocide of the Palestinian people. Not all countries are equal as signatories. Each will play to what neoliberal economists call their comparative advantage in fulfilling the desires of the US. So, what is this supply chain? Security promised by Pax Silica. It aims to bring all aspects of the economics of producing AI, such as mining, the processing of critical minerals, the production of components, the assembly of AI chips, the construction of data centers, powering and supplying water for huge data centers to handle AI technology. The exact points of these deals and the frameworks are being worked on live, with the Philippines being the leading country to make the progress in implementing Pax Silica under the U.S. direction. So Pax Silica is empowering big tech and the investment funds behind them, enriching these tech billionaires. So who is behind Pax Silica? Jacob Hilberg. He's the United States Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. He's the head of the Pax Silica initiative of the U.S. State Department. He came up from big tech. He served as the senior advisor to Alex Karp of Palantir. He pushed efforts to ban TikTok or sell it to an American company. He was seen as Trump's youthful envoy in Silicon Valley. He was married by Sam Altman of OpenAI to Keith Rabois, a big tech investor who helped start PayPal. After donating over $1 million to Trump's 2024 campaign, he became the Undersecretary of State for the Economy in December 2024. And a year later, in 2025, launched Pax Silica. Jacob is deeply entrenched in the pits of big tech, MAGA, and the military-industrial complex, pushing Trump's agenda of total global domination over its rival. Big tech is poised to make a killing off the super profits promised by Pax Silica. And Trump's family is sure to profit through their shady businesses, the World Liberty Financial and other crypto scams that rely on AI tech. Marco Rubio said earlier this week at the ASEAN ministerial meeting in Manila, this is not something we're doing because we're nice people. It's in our national interest. So countries in the global south that join Pax Silica will further lose control of their resources and see super profits extracted from the mines and sweatshops, deepening their role in the supply chain as just another low value added cog. So, in my time in the Philippines, I saw firsthand the devastating impacts of foreign mining and the collaboration of the Philippine state with foreign companies to abuse and exploit Filipino people. So, with that, I'm gonna pass it off to our next speaker, who'll be speaking from the Philippines at Ground Zero.
Thank you, Brandon. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. This is Luz with Bagong Alyansang Makabayan or Bayan USA, and here to share on the case study of the Philippines as a testing ground for Pax Silica. To illustrate the impacts, we can look to the Philippines. It is a historic colony of the US and today a loyal semi-colony. As a island chain, our chain of islands in the Southeast Pacific, it has been a long-time strategic location for the US because of its rich natural resources, which includes the critical minerals that Brandon mentioned, like copper, cobalt, and nickel. And of course, it is also a geopolitical strategic point in its proximity to the US's economic rival in China. As of today, there is a heavy U.S. military presence across the country, which includes the 9 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement bases, countless other military sites, and thousands of U.S. troops that have been rotating through these places. The rampant neoliberal deregulation of the economy, lending to the growing economic crisis, which is exacerbated by the majority landlessness of its people who are peasant farmers, whose products are exported for profit in other countries such as the US, and even the people themselves are exported as cheap labor to other countries around the globe. And this past April, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. and his administration initiated one of the first most concrete commitments to Pax Silica out of all of the current participating countries. This pledge includes the construction of an economic security zone or an ESC inside of a larger industrial economic corridor in Luzon, which is the northernmost peninsula or island of the Philippines. This industrial zone is 1,620 hectares or 4,000 acres, the equivalent of 25 Disneylands, just based outside of New Clark City, which is a former U.S. military base. This first AI native industrial hub, meaning to say that the Philippines will be a key staging point for mining, semiconductor production, and also for foreign corporations to set up factories, shipping, and data centers that will be leased on the land for decades. Or 38 malls of Asia. Yes, absolutely. In July, the Bases Conversion Development Authority announced its aim to solidify this framework deal by November and having it signed during the ASEAN summit hosted by the Philippines, where Trump is anticipated to attend. So why should and why do the Filipino people oppose Pax Silica? The Filipino people are no strangers to the plunder of land and natural resources, the intensifying exploitation of our workers and peasants, and the militarization that already exists across the archipelago. This also includes other economic zones that are mapped across the country. There's also the longstanding history of people's resistance and aspiration against plunder, against the militarization of the country. From movements opposing mining aggression in the mountains of the Philippines to the anti-US movement and the anti-US bases movement in the 90s, which led to the closing of the US bases. From these experiences, we can already anticipate what will come from this initiative and what we can do about it. Today, Marcos is hastening to secure his legacy as a champion of peace and security through his National Action Plan for Unity, Peace, and Development. This looks like the expansion of the recent signing of the critical minerals deal that was signed earlier this year. And now with Pax Silica, the US stakes hold in the Philippines to control the entirety of the supply chain, from the removal of the raw materials to the expansion of the militarization of the region, as seen in the consolidation of many different military agreements and structures under Task Force Philippines, and again, the rapid deployment and troops of weapons through different military exercises such as Balikatan. In essence, this is a continuation of war production disguised as so-called development. Next slide, please. So much like the data centers that we see in the rural parts of the US, there are major issues with the consumption and water and electricity that we can anticipate in a global South country like the Philippines, which already struggles with the high costs of privatized utilities and constant blackouts. Even the Secretary of Defense, Gilbert Teodoro, denied that there would be an impact to the water supply, but these are the water supply systems that are also used for irrigation for the minerals processing. So in a previous picture, there was a photo of red water where you could see the nickel really staining the same water that is then used for drinking and cleaning clothes. This also will have impacts to the land, including the local volcano Mount Pinatubo, which is already vulnerable to volcanic eruption and flooding. In terms of social impacts, this is also going to lead to the rampant displacement, and already is leading to the rampant displacement and aggression against peasants and indigenous people. We've seen in other places like Cagayan Valley on the other side of the mountains, organizers in Dupax del Norte have been facing tagging, trumped up charges, and arrests as land defenders against mining aggression projects. So this raises the question then, who is the prosperity for? The BCDA, the Bases Conversion Development Authority, they claim that this hub will provide up to 1 million jobs and attracting new industries in science and technology. But the US plan for this economic zone clearly lays out that the Philippine labor force will be primarily there for assembly, testing, and packaging, the low-skill, repetitive labor, whereas the technical and professional roles will remain in the US and in Taiwan, otherwise meaning that the pathway to national industrialization is impossible. And what employment is offered, again, will not provide genuine livelihood, but instead low wages to Filipino workers, to the benefit of these foreign corporations, and often temporary contractualized employment. Therefore, these profits that are made outside the country, the Filipino people will continue to scrape by with unstable employment and poverty. We also raise a concern of and scrutinize labor violations in other similar development projects of other exclusive zones, where these corporations are allowed to evade Philippine labor laws and otherwise see lack of protections for workers in these factories. On the militarization, it's important to name that we cannot forget that the proximity of this economic zone and military presence is a posture of aggression towards China. So with the base building, the deployment of troops, we also see the increasing militarization across Central Luzon. This also looks like the collusion with AI corporations that all seek to benefit from the sales of AI-powered drones, naval ships, and then certainly for the local bureaucrat capitalists who then get to utilize these resources to surveil and attack the people. This looks like equipping the armed forces of the Philippines, for example, in aggression and also in the Philippine National Police, in meeting, everyday people with police violence. So here you can see, this is Meklida-san, who was part of a protest outside of the ASEAN post-ministerial meetings earlier this week, as folks were opposing the visit by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Philippine Ambassador to the US, Jose Manuel Romualdez, who were there to discuss Pax Silica and the Luzon Economic Corridor. They were met with really horrific police violence, being thrown to the ground, barricades being pushed on them, and so forth. So this just really affirms that Marcos's terms of national security are not actually security for the people. So if the land, the water, and the people will be laid to ruin by Pax Silica, who will then benefit? Certainly the major foreign corporations, some of whom have already expressed interest in setting up shop in this economic corridor, include UPS, FedEx, Foxconn, and Texas Instruments, and many others that are trillion-dollar tech giants. And they will be able to lease this land for decades to pennies. This also will benefit the local comprador bourgeois like Binkan, the CEO of BCDA, and the Ayalas, major landowners that are anxious to tap US investment dollars while leaving the majority of the Filipino people to suffer. And most importantly, in facilitating this relationship is the US Marcos regime, which is prioritizing development and wars of aggression over the needs of the Filipino people, who are also clamoring against the rampant corruption, poverty, and instead the state is turning to neglecting them and engaging in fascist attacks against the people. This also extends to Filipinos overseas who are also struggling to meet their basic needs and get services. This also means that Jose Manuel Romualdez, who is himself as the ambassador, really facilitating these deals on US soil. He has also been a really key player in not only the signing and facilitating of the deals, but also in promoting the so-called friendship between the US and the Philippines, as seen in this year with the 80 years of US-Philippine friendship and other propaganda around US prosperity and national security, which he is so quickly to propagate while ignoring and in many cases facilitating the attacks on migrants here, including the massive detentions and deportations that we see for precarious Filipino workers. But what does this also mean for the US is that the Philippines being their testing ground means that they can also apply this framework to other countries around the globe, which will then also exacerbate the crisis of exploitation and oppression for the peoples of the world. And with that, I will pass to Tino from ILPS.
Thank you, Luz, and thank you, everyone. Tino with ILPS-US, and we're going to share a little bit about, what it looks like in other countries, and then we'll go a little bit more in depth into why the US is driving forward this Pax Silica initiative. Yeah, the Philippines is one important part of the US-dominated tech supply chain among many countries that will be impacted by the US's race to secure its dominance in global tech. As Brandon mentioned, over the last couple of months, the Pax Silica initiative grew to now over 25 signatory countries. And among the different signatories, each country plays a crucial role in the supply chain, from South Korea's high-tech, high-bandwidth memory chips to Israel's chip design. The critical minerals are mined in one country, processed in another, and then manufactured into semiconductors, and then applied in AI systems around the world. So Pax Silica seeks to secure and streamline these points into a seamless US-dominated supply chain. So we'll look first at South Korea and what it looks like there. These are just a few points on what it looks like, but also, what it could potentially look like to resist. In South Korea, it provides the US with significant technological capability to manufacture semiconductors. Major South Korean corporations benefit from the high demand of semiconductors at the expense of South Korean workers, especially at Samsung Electronics, the world's largest memory chip producer. South Korea accounts for 20% of the world's total semiconductor production capacity, making it a critical piece for the US to secure in its supply chain manufacturing ability. So Pax Silica will only further secure the US's grip in South Korea and will only intensify further the exploitation of Korean workers. But this is not happening without resistance. 48,000 Samsung workers have threatened to go on strike in the last year, with the potential to disrupt the whole of the South Korean economy. Samsung makes up 12% of the Korean economy. And so the worker struggle in South Korea and the broader people's movement can play a critical role in challenging Pax Silica, the national economy in Korea, but also disrupting the supply chain that the US is trying to secure. Just one example. Next, if we go to Palestine, we see that Palestine is being destroyed for the AI and tech development there as well. The genocide of the Palestinian people continues to escalate. And this is a clear example of what Trump and US imperialism will do in order to maintain its dominance. It's not just a land grab for space, but a full-scale genocide because the people are resisting and have been fighting back for decades for their own land and future. Trump and the Zionist state continue to ramp up the genocide in an effort to completely destroy the Palestinian people and solidify their control of the land and the resources to serve their political, economic, and military interests. If you look at that, the devastation there on the left, but also on the right, the map, I think it's the dark brown portions where Kushner's plan is to really turn those into data centers, whole portions of Gaza for their interests. As a signatory to Pax Silica, Israel contributes high-tech engineering and tech development to the global supply chain. And the US and Israel want to convert Gaza into a tech hub with projects like, quote, this Gaza Reconstruction, Economic Acceleration, and Transformation project. Pax Silica will build on the commitment of Israel through Netanyahu to serve as a puppet of the US and advance its own interests as well in the region in building a greater Israel throughout the area. And then lastly, if we just look at the US, a lot of folks are familiar with the struggles here. Our US in terms of developing AI and tech and data for its war economy here. As Pax Silica enables the exploitation of workers and plunder of land and natural resources in the global south, the investment in and deployment of AI technology here in the US has also intensified. The drive to develop AI technology has led to massive layoffs of workers as jobs become, quote, obsolete. It has led to the proliferation of data centers that have displaced whole communities, and as folks in the chat have mentioned, polluting the land, water, driving up energy costs and using massive amounts of energy. And it led to the increased surveillance of our communities, from advanced ICE surveillance to the surveillance of workers on the shop floor. Here in San Francisco, there are struggles in other parts of the country against flock cameras and Skydio drones that are patrolling our communities. Pax Silica will try to ensure that AI and technology investments can be prioritized for the development of more tools of surveillance and warfare here in the US, not to solve the real day-to-day issues of working people. It takes away jobs while also allowing these billionaires to make even more super profits as part of the reprioritization of our whole economy for war. The budget for war in the Defense Department, the Department of War, is now over $1.15 trillion, while our healthcare, education, SNAP benefits are getting slashed. So next slide, why is the US driving Pax Silica? The US, as the world's largest imperialist power, faces a threat to its domination and the rising economic power of China, particularly in technology. The US wants all of the world's nations open for business so their monopolies can come in with predatory loans, set up mines, plantations, and factories, and control markets overseas to sell their surplus products funneling the wealth of all of these other countries into the pockets of US financial giants. As China also expands its investments in business initiatives, this shakes up the division of the world that's currently stacked in the favor of the US. So US imperialists are directly threatened by China's rise, but even more so in this field of tech production. China controls, as I think Brandon mentioned, over 90% of the refining of critical minerals. And by controlling this step used to produce all tech, it dominates in high-tech manufacturing. So the US is racing to control this production to counter China's economic strength overall and cut off any advantage that its largest competitor has. In an imperialist system where global powers are driving closer and closer to all-out war, controlling the tech supply chain is not just a question of getting more profits than your competitor, but it is a decisive factor in determining which superpower will triumph. So with the Pax Silica initiative, we see the U.S. state doing its best job to rule on behalf of the biggest monopolies, using all its tools to ensure that the U.S. dominates economically, military, and politically. While the State Department spearheads the initiative and gets all their imperialist allies and puppet countries on board, like the Philippines, Israel, and Korea, Congress authorizes massive spending for the quote-unquote investment fund, and Trump himself plans to travel to the ASEAN summit in November in the Philippines to seal the deals himself. Corporations like Foxconn, Microsoft are funded by the U.S. to expand their operations and profiteering. The tech supply chain, these tech monopolies, are a key part of the U.S.'s national security strategy. So the U.S. weapons arsenal is dependent on these technologies. Trump's escalation of war is proving the U.S.'s supply of war material is not limitless, but hinges on key points in production, potential choke points that are currently controlled by its largest military rivals. By controlling the tech supply chain, the U.S. wants to ensure its military dominance and continue to enrich the tech corporations profiting from billion-dollar military contracts like OpenAI and others. So AI and tech is specifically valuable for huge corporations. This industry, since it is used to increase production without hiring more workers. As the global economic crisis gets worse, corporations must now invest in these technologies to squeeze more profits from the workers. Corporations are also looking to Pax Silica as a means to dump their investments and profit from expanding their operations without labor or environmental regulations. And AI and big tech aren't just a profit-making scam. They're being invested and expanded to give the U.S. military and surveillance agencies more power and tools to attack and repress people's movements. The U.S. State Department under Marco Rubio recently held a meeting of world leaders against the threat of, quote, far-left terrorism, calling for crackdowns against anyone opposing Trump's attacks on the people and on people's movements against U.S. imperialist control. This comes right after the UN's Counterterrorism Week, where the U.S. pushed the use of AI in counterinsurgency against people's movements resisting U.S. control of their land and resources. Due to decades of neoliberal policies, the U.S. has drastically reduced its domestic productive capacities and relies on the dominance and plunder of the global South for resources and technology. They built a class of puppet leaders and bureaucrats who rule nations like the Philippines and El Salvador to the benefit of the imperialists, opening the land for foreign plunder while using brutal suppression against land defenders and people's movements. People are rising up and resisting. I think the next slide shows some of that. But these elites and their overseas officials are cutting deals with the U.S. and are directly responsible for the coming destruction of livelihood and the sellout of our sovereignty. So the Pax Silica initiative represents the extreme desperation and limitations of an overstretched U.S. empire, feeding off the greed of corporations and local elites, and we must reject it at every turn. So I'll next pass it back to Luz to talk about how we're going to fight against Pax Silica and its imperialist control.
Yes, thank you, Tino. And for the Filipino people in the Philippines, they are really waging the call to shut the Pax down from being established in November in the Philippines. And in order to do this, we must agitate, organize, and mobilize to make this call from insurmountable to a victory of the people. And opposing Pax Silica as overseas Filipinos and allies, and to continue to expose the selling out of the country by the US Marcos regime. We recently and continue to celebrate our victory of blocking Marcos from also joining and getting a seat on the UN National Security Council in June, which was developed from clearly mobilizing from the Philippines to across the globe and exposing the rampant human rights violations of international humanitarian law by the US Marcos regime. And it clearly shows that we have the capability to do it again. So some of our thrusts to make this campaign possible here in the US, we are conducting mass propaganda and education amongst the Filipino people and our allies, highlighting the mass movement, but also the revolutionary resistance in the countryside. So while development aggression is a mass issue in the Philippines, Pax Silica is not strongly known or understood by Filipinos, not yet understood by Filipinos overseas, and is key to linking our issues of land, economy, and militarization to see beyond the language being used, like national security and unity, peace, and development, which is being espoused by the US Marcos regime. And it's important and key that we also highlight the decades-long armed struggle that has been key to preventing the US from achieving total domination of the country. And exposing this target, we must also broaden the people's movement against AI and tech being used for war and plunder. First and foremost, the frontline impacted communities, such as the peasants and workers, for us overseas, organizing amongst the working class. Also to highlight the indigenous people and their struggle for land. We also will continue to reach out to other sectors and other groups that are activated by the AI boom that's happening right now, such as artists, the scientists, and environmental activists. And overall, for the overseas movement, it's important that we build our capacity, starting with education, and also contribute to solidarity with other peoples in the fights against imperialism, with other national liberation movements, and in engaging in local campaigns that can also contribute to opposing AI war profiteers, such as Anduril, and also being on the strike lines with workers, such as the ILW dock workers in Northern California, who are mutually in solidarity with the peasant farmers and workers in Negros Island of the Philippines. And then certainly the organizing and the forming the United Front for the Filipinos for Peace Network, which Bayan and Malaya movement have launched in the US, and then also contributing to building the broad anti-imperialist United Front in alliances such as the International League of People's Struggle. And we also call on everyone to mobilize with us to oppose our class enemies and escalate the fight in opposing Pax Silica signing from here to the Philippines. So next Monday, we will be marching on Malacanang in the Philippines and in here in the US on the consulates and embassy for the People's State of the Nation address, expressing our call to fight and end the corrupt puppet and fascist US Marcos regime and expose the Taksil Sabayan, the traitors of the country, such as Marcos, Duterte, and Romualdez, and countering Marcos's false praise of prosperity, which he will espouse in his own State of the Nation address. And extending our solidarity with other people's struggles, we invite you to join us on August 15 for a day of action on Korea Liberation Day, opposing the role of South Korea as another central pillar of Pax Silica. And then, looking ahead to November, as we want to join mass protests around the globe and stop and ceasing the signing of the agreement in the Philippines, we also encourage folks to come with us and go to the Philippines, engage on peace missions and other opportunities to immerse with the communities in places like Central Luzon. But lastly, as Bayan, we assert the Filipino people's right to choose our genuine independence, be free of subjugation by the US, and to advance the national democratic movement toward genuine agrarian reform and national industrialization. In the ever-worsening crisis of joblessness, we also must continue to call to end the subservience of corrupt government officials who broker our land and people to the highest bidder. In this case, the US Marcos regime and their friends in foreign corporations. Only then will we be able to stop the systematic export of our people and achieve dignified jobs, wages, and the lives that we seek in our motherland. And that's also how we want to contribute to the global struggle of the oppressed peoples around the world against US imperialism. And with that, I will pass it to Gordon.
Thank you, Luz. And as ICHIRP, we definitely want to, in contributing this, I encourage people to join the solidarity movement of the Philippines in this critical fight against U.S. war and plunder. As the U.S. is making the Philippines its model for the world on how to secure this global supply chain, secure resources and labor for the U.S., we should be there with the Filipino people in fighting back, especially here in the U.S., which is the major dominating power in the Philippines. And one of the most important ways and impactful ways to build that solidarity movement is to actually go to the Philippines, go be with and learn from and support the communities fighting back against Pax Silica, fighting back against U.S. militarism, against plunder and destruction of the environment and resources, and against the US-backed counterinsurgency against fascist terror in the countryside. And so we want to invite everyone here tonight to join us this September, the 25th to 27th in Toronto, Canada, for the Global Kapit BC Conference and the 5th ICHIRP Global Assembly. We'll be bringing together people from all around the world in a 2-day conference of panels and workshops with human rights defenders, land defenders, human rights activists, and workers from the Philippines at the front lines of this fight against Pax Silica and the US's war and plunder, to talk about how we can build a stronger and more global solidarity movement for the Philippines. So would love for people to join, and you can go to ichirp.net/capibc to learn more and register. With that, I'll pass it back to ILPS.
Thanks. So to round it out, as the U.S. empire sinks its claws into our homelands at every point in this supply chain, we have to build up our struggles at each of these points and link these together in common and mutually supportive forms of action. So we look forward to working with everyone here. Across the U.S., there have been growing campaigns in opposition to U.S. acts of war and the expansion of the war economy. There have been developing fights that many of you all have been part of against the very weapons corporations and war profiteers, which are going to benefit from Pax Silica, including, shout it out in the chat if you've been part of these campaigns against Anduril, Cerberus, Hanwha, and directly opposing AI tech corporations, which profit from the US-driven plunder around the world. Many of you were in the streets with us here in San Francisco against with groups like Honor the Earth that has been opposing data centers on native lands. Against Scale and AI, we marched 600 plus strong against those two headquarters here in San Francisco. And in SoCal, just recently, there's been growing action against Anduril, recently mobilizing hundreds in San Diego during the RIMPAC military exercises there. These sirens are coming on to oppress us too. But we continue to develop these fights and develop these new struggles that are capable of striking blows against these major corporations. We exploit working people, destroy the land, and displace us from our homes and communities. It's important to link these struggles and these fights against war profiteers with struggles around the world as we face a common enemy of imperialism, which Pax Silica seeks to reinforce. We must align and combine our various fights to strike decisive blows at each part of the supply chain in common action, and workers taking action against major tech corporations like Samsung and Korea are linking up together. People's movements in places like the Philippines, Palestine, and elsewhere are waging key fights for national liberation, which are among the most important solutions to this issue of Pax Silica. The success of these national liberation struggles is one less foothold for the U.S. to exploit the land and people and wage war on our homelands. So we invite everyone to join ILPS in our campaigns to oppose U.S.-led war and plunder against Anduril, Cerberus, Hanwha, OpenAI, and other tech and war profiteers. And please sign on and join the campaign to reject Pax Silica. So we'll close it there, and I'll pass it back to Gordon.
Thank you, Tino. So we'll be taking a few questions from the chat before we head into our regional discussion groups. So I see already in the chat, there's a question from Debbie with the Kalikasan Solidarity Organization. The question is, and for any of our speakers tonight, if you can help answer the question, with respect to the Pax Silica tech supply chain that has been described tonight, where are the bottlenecks or choke points that might lend themselves most readily to the people's resistance? And what would coordinating that resistance across national borders and language barriers at scale entail?
Um, Let me see if I got the question right. Well, the people who are tied down to the land, the indigenous people, have every right to that land and to the resources that are on that land. So that already lends credence their right to defend their land. So that's one aspect to that.
Yes, thank you, Brandon, especially at the front lines of the fight against Pax Silica. No, I can add here, I think there's a lot of different fights and local fights, especially against data centers here in the US. You're seeing it pop up all across the US, local communities putting a fight against uh, the building of data centers in their backyards that take up huge amounts of water and energy and disrupt the life of the people there. Okay, and we have a question from earlier. Uh, some group members expressed interest in what kinds of microchips will be manufactured in the data centers they're planning on building in Pax Silica. And the question is, do we know anything about this at that point? Or I guess the question is, what do we know about the specifics of what will be built in this economic security zone?
Is this with regards to the Philippines specifically?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yeah. I think I think there's more information coming out about the different corporations that are establishing or investing because it's not just necessarily manufacturers, but also data centers. And so the manufacturing is separate from the data centers that are being established. But I think we're still in the process of investigating that, and certainly welcome, especially anyone who's like an avid desk researcher. For buy-in, for example, we are gathering our desk research for our use out of the Philippines campaign, which is where we'll be supporting and coordinating and echoing the calls from the Philippines. But yeah, maybe if others have any other information, that would be good.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And I would just add, as I've been following the news coming out of the Philippines, this is one of the big questions. The Marcos government keeps promising jobs and all this, but it's all just rhetoric at this point because they're not revealing any public details about what exactly Pax Silica means. So it's still unclear exactly what they're planning to build, but I think Luz did a good job of explaining what the impacts will be on the Filipino people. Okay, are there any other questions before we move into our regional discussion groups? Okay, if there aren't any other questions right now for our speakers tonight, if we could pull back up the slides and we'll talk about how we'll be going into our group discussions. We have two questions for everyone tonight. The first is, how can we agitate our community to reject Pax Silica? And the second is, what actions can we take to stop Pax Silica? So why does Pax Silica matter to your community, and what actions can we take? So encourage people to, we'll have them up in a second, different breakout groups, and we will have regional facilitators and note takers. And we'll give people about 30 minutes to discuss amongst themselves. And then hopefully we'll be able to come back and hear from people about the different great work they're doing all across the country. in organizing their communities and fighting back against Pax Silica. I believe we'll also have a breakout group for people that are not necessarily in any region or more national in scope.
Let's go ahead and just get some brief sharings from everyone about what you discuss in your regional breakout groups. Let's go around the US. Maybe we could start down in SoCal and then work our way up the West Coast.
Hey, this is Teresa from the SoCal breakout room. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so we discussed hosting like more EDs and teach-ins, and knowing that so many people in SoCal are being impacted by Pax Silica, especially as the land of semiconductors and war technology corporations, but also might not fully understand its impacts yet. So a lot of teach-ins, a lot of using the primer that's in the works, and also taking up longer campaigns, especially for the 2028 elections, and seeing how BBM is selling the land in service of US imperialism. So yeah, a lot of really using political education to agitate everybody, and people were sharing about the Andrew Out campaign that doesn't just not just in Irvine, but in Southern California, everywhere, and seeing how issues of worker exploitation and the displacement of people by Andrew, to issues of Pax Silica in New Clark City, and also just the significance of like corporations like Andrew to Pax Silica that really make all these like war making tech. So there's also like passing a letter to sign on the Andrew Out campaign, and also for all the different colleges in SoCal, targeting a lot of the STEM students on campus, who are really like these jobs of working for these corporations are really being marketed and sold to them, especially with schools partnership with OpenAI, like in the CSUs, and also like in the UCs and other schools, and investigating more about the relationship of these other AI corporations, like OpenAI, in terms of how they might also be involved with Pax Silica, and then just looking also at other similar companies like General Atomics in San Diego, or other these defense and war tech companies, and in terms of other things, to other campaigns, the End RIMPAC campaign is ongoing, and people have been mobilizing to San Diego. We've had 2 actions, with one more in August, and then also we've had banner drops. So like really seeing how all these war tech companies are in bed together to like really to really hurt the people and the environment. That was some of SoCal. If I don't know if I missed anything, but if people want to add, so education, legislative advocacy, and kind of really finding concrete ways to connect, especially with all the biotech and AI tech happening here in SoCal.
Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. Let's head on up the West Coast. We hear back from NorCal.
Yeah. So we had a very productive breakout room. Shout out NorCal. We started talking about or we started off talking about like our educational and political education efforts. One group is already working on finalizing a no tech and AI for exploitation primer, and we discussed making a graphic to help people visualize the different data centers being proposed in Hayward, in SF, Pittsburgh, and Gilroy, and then also the like 50 plus existing data centers down the South Bay. And the primer would also help people understand like the different types of and impacts of the various kinds of data centers, which are more and more being more of the proposed ones now are the larger um, AI ones that are, receiving more attention for being much more disruptive and that. And then we started talking about the different local efforts that are already taking place to sort of forge unities and local resistance to data centers in people's communities. There's already a lot of resistance to the proposal in Pittsburgh, and there's a lot of crossover with the anti-flock flock cameras campaigns. Um, yeah, I hope that we'll be able to share the primer to other people attending here to respond to the person in chat. But we got talking about like the town halls that because some of these local communities have already held their own town halls, sort of like people's forums for folks to get together and discuss their concerns about these data centers. And there are more proposed. So we got to thinking about trying to do like a Bay Area wide people's forum on uh, data center development. Hopefully trying to hold it in October before the signing of Pax Silica and really, form a kind of united front against these developments in our area while pushing forward the anti-imperialist analysis and the different connections between, exploitation in the global South and warmongering around the world. Did I miss anything? Well, oh, nothing is being signed in October. October is just before November, and November is when Pax Silica is being signed.
Thank you so much, NorCal. Let's keep on heading up the coast. Can we hear from Oregon?
Hey, this is Debbie. We kicked off our conversation discussing some of the organizing work that's been going on in rural communities in Eastern Oregon, in Columbia County, where one of our number is from. Um, I don't know the details of it, but as I understand it, there's our data center constructions sort of being fast-tracked all along the Columbia River. It's having pretty significant environmental impacts, and there was discussion amongst our group about the importance and opportunities for building connections with these communities and establishing kind of stronger ties to the broader anti-militarism movement, with kind of drawing those connections, making efforts to draw those connections between the tech boom and data center construction and AI, and more specifically, its sort of applications in um, the global South through counterinsurgency and imperialist war. Um, we as a group united on the importance of, especially over these next few months in the lead up to the ASEAN summit in November that Trump is expected to be attending. We see that as a major flashpoint that we need to be prepping for. And in the interest of that, we see continued prop and education material production being a really significant task on our plate. And we're hoping to connect to the broader movement nationally and internationally in the interest of that. What else? Yeah, those were the big bullet points. Anyone else from Portland? If I'm missing something, please chime in.
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to add is like there are, so many communities and peoples that are impacted and touched by Pax Silica. And Oregon is a really key place in the semiconductor manufacturing supply chain, and in like the data center distribution. And so we really, for a lot of us, the tech for war and the impacts of tech was a huge takeaway from the National Assembly and Political Conference. So ILPS is going to have our report back on the 30th. And so we really want to have that not just be a venue for sharing back, but really lively discussion on a conversation around tech for war, surveillance, flock, and Pax Silica, and begin to really do that prop and education with impacted communities here in Oregon.
Thanks, Iago.
I think this chip is BS.
Okay, awesome, Oregon. All right, how about Washington?
Yeah, going up the coast is good. We have pretty similar issues in Washington because of our hydropower and the Columbia River. We were kind of discussing, in Seattle, there's currently a 1-year ban on data centers, and in Tacoma, there's actually a permanent ban, I believe. So we were talking about that, but also discussing how Amazon is planning to build 16 new data centers in like central eastern Washington. So one of the things we were really saying is we want to continue doing like mass education on this, but also connecting with other organizations that we've worked with in like central Washington or even out as far as Spokane, that could be, linking the issues of migrants' rights with this like tech boom. Unfortunately, Seattle is really becoming known as like a war tech hub with our military bases, and we were talking about Palantir has an office, Anduril has an office, a lot of really bad companies that are gonna really benefit from this land grab in the Philippines. So I think, and then we also talked about local impacts to labor. There's a lot of concern in the like union community around job replacement. People are afraid they're going to lose their jobs from the proliferation of AI. So while some of the building trades like want to get a piece of building these data centers, they're really going to be potentially wiping out a lot of jobs from other unions and sectors. One particularly that we're learning of is that the ILWU in Tacoma is really concerned around AI clauses in their contract that allow the owners of the ports to actually replace jobs for technological advancements that can cut labor. So I think these are really things that we want to take on and do more mass education and connect with some of these other cities where people are trying to take advantage of our hydropower and land conversion really from farmland that they think they can build data centers. So yeah, I think that was pretty much it. We had almost the whole West Coast. We had folks on all the way up to near Bellingham. So it's really cool to hear everyone's ideas.
Thank you, Washington State. Let's go on head over to Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of similar things. Obviously in DC, a lot of the deals and like meetings to support Pax Silica are being made here. And we know that when we confronted Joshua Bingkang from the BCDA and Romualdez at the Pax Silica Summit, that was a post that went viral, and a lot of the traction was from people actually in the Philippines. So we want to show, that the fight is active here too. So we want to continue to track when these meetings are happening and then confront them with the demands of the Filipino people. Um, Another part, obviously, about DC is that a lot of the defense contractors and weapons manufacturers are based here. So there's an opportunity to link with people who are already, fighting against them. And then also, obviously, the Congress and State Department. So there's an opportunity to pressure representatives because really Congress has to approve funding for Pax Silica. And then the State Department, this is obviously an initiative of theirs. And then another thing about the DMV area is that the fights against data centers being built are really active. And in Northern Virginia, I think there's like something like 600 data centers. There are active fights in Maryland as well. And so this gives us the opportunity to raise people's consciousness because they're already agitated and connected to the Philippines, help them see their data center issues around what's happening in their backyards as an issue of sovereignty and of class struggle. So we can bring to city council hearings, that's something we talked about, and then connect that to the displacement and forced migration of people in the Philippines and the economic draft, because we know this is all part of, the runway towards increasing militarization and war. Um, with that, we talked about having a town hall maybe with PYM, Notodol with the connections to Pax Silica in South Korea, and then the local fights against data centers. And then Katarunga in DC is working on a campaign. So I think a lot of research should be done and fights here.
All right, going from the belly of the beast, let's head to the Big Apple.
Hello. So in the Northeast, we talked about, well, first we talked about the need for crop. We weren't sure if we had like a Poliato or anything out yet. So we're in need of some research and crop, but then there was also a point brought up that even before we produce a Poliato, how are we like bringing this to our kababayan or like bringing this to working folks one-on-one, and what is our broad unity against Pax Silica? So someone mentioned like, a lot of folks still use AI and it's relatively normalized and common for a lot of people in their workplaces. So like one broad unity that was brought up is like there's these billions of dollars going towards things like Pax Silica, and how is AI actually improving our lives when billions are going toward it and our vital like social services are being cut simultaneously. And yeah, there were a lot of like prop ideas, creative prop ideas like songs and videos and illustrations, all sorts of things, just like encouraging us to really use our um, all of the cultural workers in our organizations to push prop. We have a PSONA coming up here in the Northeast where Pax Silica is a major talking point, and it's also already getting particularized to like Cerberus, which is the billionaire private equity firm here with connections to the Department of War that is bought Subic Bay and is leasing it to a munitions factory, and also Hanwha Out, a South Korean corporation in Philly that bought out the shipyard and is developing nuclear submarines. So even at Pisona, I think there's opportunities for us to create prop, kind of like particularizing Northeast campaigns that are related to Pax Silica. And then we also had a Tango Migrante Queens watch party. So we had Tita Linda share. Yeah, so we were asking like, how does this relate to the economic struggles here in the Northeast? And Tita Linda answered that question. Feel free to elaborate on it if you want, but I can summarize. She mentioned Pax Silica reminded her of this corporation named Good Harvest I believe in her hometown, where like a lot of her friends and family, basically everyone in the area invested so much of their time, so much of their money also, Like most people in the area worked at this corporation. And then this family, the Lopez family, fled the Philippines and taking all this money, taking all the people's money with them. And that forced a lot of folks to move, to migrate. And so, yeah, so Tita Linda linked, Pax Silica, these issues to forced migration. Yeah, I don't know if you want to share it all, Tita Linda, no pressure. If not, but yeah, I think that was kind of what we talked about. We were just starting to brainstorm, like, what are the broad unities we have? Like, how do we get folks to care about this, even just the workers we're already talking with? And if anyone else from the Northeast has anything that I missed, please go ahead. All right, I'm getting thumbs up, so I think that's no one else has anything.
Thank you. All right, and we've got people from across the US and our other areas group. I don't know if there's anything you all would like to share tonight.
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. This is Zaira from Malaya, Chicago North Side. There were a lot of fellow Chicagoans in our group, in addition to San Francisco, Hawaii, and New Zealand. So at least us folks from Chicago were sharing about how out here there are plans to open a quantum facility on the south side, which is like primarily where a lot of working class immigrants and Black and brown people live here in the city. Recently, there was a forum, like a between, I know, like Anak Bayan, our local chapter of like Chirp, Puso, as well as other organizations that are in solidarity with our movement. So like Black Alliance for Peace, Science for the People. And folks were just sharing how taking up this fight both against the quantum facility in relation to Pax Silica as well, how these are impacting people's livelihoods, their homes, how this is really important to see this as like a chance for solidarity of people against imperialist forces as well as like encroaching capitalist interests. I know our friend from Hawaii and High Chirp shared about how RIMPAC is happening right now, one of the other like war games that happens. And I know there's a petition to end it. And they talked about that as well in relation to like the resources that are being taken through Pax Silica. And relatedly, our friend from New Zealand also mentioned how New Zealand recently joined the Balikatan exercises and how that as well can be tied back to, and all of these different like war games and ways that resources are being used for like training AI models or like going to war manufacturing and stuff like that, like defense and things like that. We are really trying to figure out ways to push political education and connecting all of those issues together to show folks, even out here, even if they might not have a front of mind connection to the Philippines, why things like the quantum facility and Pax Silica are connected and why we should all be concerned about the well-being of our fellow people around the world.
Incredible Midwest. Okay. Thank you everyone for staying on so late. Really looking forward and so inspired by everyone from across the country as we continue to build the movement to reject and shut down Pax Silica. And they're projecting that Trump, if he travels to Manila in November for the ASEAN summit, that they're planning to make a big ceremony of signing it. So the count is on for us to build the mass movement, to build a united front against Pax Silica and work to get it shut down, not just in the Philippines, but all across the world. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to seeing efforts all around.